the age of crusaders and kings. My brothers and sisters, the wind of change was a cold one in these years, a wind that carried the scent of steel, sweat, and the Holy Land's dust. The Pope's throne no longer just a seat of prayer, but a throne of kings, for now Rome wielded a weapon, forged in faith and ambition alike. The crusade. After the fires of the First Crusade and the crowning of Jerusalem with a Christian king, the faithful believed the world was theirs for the taking. But oh, how fragile the kingdoms of men can be! The holy city would not remain theirs for long. In the east, a new lion stirred Saladin, whose scimitar would cut the dreams of Europe's kings like wheat in the field. The Pope had become the voice of Christendom, yet that voice often spoke in whispers to the ears of emperors and kings alike. Pope Alexander III, a man of cunning and conviction, clashed with Frederick, the red-bearded emperor who saw himself as the second coming of Caesar. Frederick sought to bend Rome to his will, to make the Pope a servant to the empire's iron. Yet Alexander was no lamb. He stood firm, excommunicating the emperor, rallying the cities of Lombardy against him, forging alliances that turned swords against Frederick's ambitions. And at Legnano in 1176, when the emperor's armies fell to the Lombard League, the Pope's voice rang louder than any blade. But power's cost is never paid in gold alone. In the east, Jerusalem fell to Saladin in 1187, and the world wept. The Pope, now Urban III, called for a new crusade, but his voice was weak, his health failing, and so it fell to Gregory VIII, and then to Clement III, to raise the banners of Christendom once more. Kings answered the call. Richard the Lionheart, Philip Augustus of France, and the aged Emperor Frederick Barbarossa himself. They called it the Third Crusader, tide of faith and steel that would clash with Saladin's crescent on the sands of Acre and Jaffa. But even the mightiest kings could not bend fate's will. Frederick drowned in the waters of Cilicia. Philip returned home in bitterness, and Richard found himself fighting Saladin to a standstill, his sword sharp but his cause unfinished. Jerusalem remained in Muslim hands, and so the Pope's dream of a united Christendom slipped like sand through the fingers. Yet back in Rome, the chair of Peter remained unshaken. The successors of Clement III, Celestine III, and Innocent III would see to that. For Innocent III, he was no mere bishop, he was a king among priests, a master of thrones and altars alike. He claimed dominion over all Christendom, declaring that even emperors knelt before the Pope's feet. He called himself the Vicar of Christ, and his word was law. Kings who defied him, like John of Inglar, found their crowns weighed down by Rome's curse. Excommunication was no longer just a spiritual weapon. It was a blade that could topple kingdoms. Under Innocent's gaze, the Fourth Crusade was launched. But my children, it was not the Holy Land that felt the sword's edge. It was Constantinople, the jewel of the East. Christians turned on Christians, and the Pope's blessing fueled a tide of blood and gold that swept away an empire. Innocent's power reached its zenith, but every sun has its setting, and though his light shone bright, shadows gathered on the horizon. The empire he built would tremble, and the voice of Peter would face challenges yet unseen. So remember this: even the shepherd's crook can become a sword in the hands of a man with faith enough to wield it. And in this age of kings and crusades, the Pope's sword cut both ways against the enemies of the cross and against the faithful themselves. My brothers and sisters, the Pope's staff was no longer just a shepherd's crook, it had become a scepter. In the years after the Fourth Crusade's bitter triumph, the papacy reached out its hand to claim the very soul of Europe. But power is a hungry beast, and every victory births new enemies. The 13th century dawned with Innocent III's shadow stretching across the continent. He had crowned emperors and humbled kings. He had called for crusades that bled nations dry. But even the greatest lights fade. With Innocent's passing, his successors found themselves inheriting a world of ambition and conflict, where Christendom's unity was more dream than reality. Pope Honorius III, a man of learning and caution, tried to steady the helm. He oversaw the Fifth Crusade, yet, even as Christian armies marched on Egypt, their swords turned brittle in the desert sun. Victory slipped through their fingers like water, and in that defeat, the Pope's authority lost a little of its gleam. Ah, but my flock, even in failure, the papacy learned to wield its power in new ways. Gregory X took the staff, next a man as fiery as any prophet. He did not content himself with war abroad, he declared war at home. Heresy had begun to creep like a disease into the bones of Europe. Cathars in the south of France, Waldensians in the Alpine shadows. Gregory answered with a weapon sharper than any sword. The Inquisition, do you hear that word, children? The Inquisition, a tribunal of priests and judges who sniffed out heresy like bloodhounds. They dug into the dark corners of men's souls, and the Pope's shadow lengthened across the land. But even Gregory's power could not silence the drums of war. The emperors of Germany, Frederick II chief among them, would not kneel to Rome's command. Frederick, the wonder of the world, crowned in Sicily and wearing the imperial purple, claimed to be a friend to all faiths and a servant to none. He mocked the Pope's authority, built alliances with Muslims, and called himself the true heir of Rome. Gregory excommunicated him again and again, but Frederick cared little. He waged war in Italy, he defied the Pope's decrees, he dreamed of an empire free from papal chains, and when Gregory IX passed into the darkness, his successor Innocent IV took up the same cry. Innocent IV convened a council at Lyon in 1245, where he denounced Frederick as a heretic and an enemy of the Church. He declared the emperor deposed, a throne shattered by the Pope's breath. But Frederick, cunning and relentless, refused to bow. The war between cross and crown raged on, tearing Christendom aside. But the papacy was not a prize to be won, so even as Frederick's armies marched, the Pope's legates sowed rebellion in the emperor's lands. The Pope's word was a blade that cut deeper than any sword, and when Frederick died in 1250, the imperial eagle fell from the sky, leaving a shattered empire and a papacy that stood triumphant for a time. Yet, even victory carried a price. The years that followed saw the papacy's hand reaching deeper into secular affairs, appointing kings, dividing lands, raising taxes in the name of St. Peter. Popes like Alexander IV and Urban IV ruled like monarchs, their courts rivaling any kings in splendor and intrigue. And then came Pope Boniface, the eighth, a man whose pride rivaled any Caesar's. He declared that the Pope held both swords, spiritual and temporal, and that all kings must bend the knee. His bull, Unum Sanctum, thundered that salvation itself required submission to Rome. But even popes must reckon with the arrogance of kings. For, across the Alps, in France, King Philip IV, Philip the Fair, gathered his power. He taxed the clergy, defied the Pope's decrees, and demanded gold from Rome's coffers, and Boniface, in his fury, excommunicated Philip and declared the Pope's supremacy. But pride goes before a fall. In 1303, agents of Philip stormed Boniface's residence at an laid hands on the Pope himself and beat him bloody. Though he was rescued, Boniface died a broken man, and the papacy, once the unchallenged voice of God, found itself trembling. So remember this, my children, every throne built on pride must one day kneel to the sword, and every crown, no matter how bright, can be stolen by the shadow of ambition. My brothers and sisters, gather near, for the age of the papacy's grandeur was coming to a close. and a long shadow was cast across the Holy See. Power so carefully hoarded slipped like water through trembling fingers. Pride had turned the papal throne to gold and iron, but pride is a flame that consumes its bearer. After the death of Boniface VIII, the papacy found itself humbled, mocked by kings, defied by emperors, even whispered about in Rome's streets as a pawn of France. For, in 1305, the cardinals chose Clement V, a man whose throne lay not in Rome but in Avignon, France, a seat of power, more palace than pulpit. Avignon, the city of wine and song, became the Pope's gilded cage. Here 7 popes would reign, exiled from the tomb of Peter, their authority choked by French gold and politics. Rome wept. The people of Italy saw their shepherd as a king in foreign robes. Yet, in Avignon, the papacy did not fade. It grew fat on taxes and tithes, built palaces grander than any king's, and sent legates to rule where swords failed. The papal court became a court of princes, ambassadors, lawyers, merchants, all vying for favors. It was a time when the voice of Peter came wrapped in silks and coin. Oh, how the faithful suffered! In the streets of Rome, the churches fell to ruin, the basilicas to dust. Thieves prowled the night, and the name of the Pope was spoken with bitterness. But the world spun on, and power called men's hearts to darker dreams. In these days, the 100 Years' War bled France and England dry, while the plague, the Black Death, swept like the angel of death itself. The Pope's legates preached of repentance, but the people saw only graves. Fear ruled the land. The very sky seemed to turn black. Yet amid this darkness, the Avignon popes, John the 22nd and Benedict the 12th, among them, tightened their grip on the church. They expanded papal taxes, claimed rights over bishops, and ruled with a pen sharper than any sword. But every decree forged new enemies. Kings resented the Pope's hand in their kingdoms. Priests grew weary of foreign rule. Then came Urban V, the man who dreamed of returning to Rome. And in 1367, he crossed the Alps, the bells of Rome ringing to welcome Peter's heir. But Rome was not the city he had left behind. It was a shell. Bandits roamed its hills, rival factions fought in its streets. The dream of a holy city was a memory drowned in blood. Urban fled back to Avignon, leaving Rome a broken bride, abandoned and alone. And so the papacy limped into the twilight of the century, a kingdom in exile, its voice strong but its heart divided. Yet even in Avignon's shadow, the seeds of change were sown. For in the villages of Italy and the halls of France, voices whispered of reform, of a church that had grown fat and corrupt, a church that had forgotten the poor and the faithful. A storm was coming, my flock, a tempest that would sweep away the silks and the gold, leaving only the bones of faith. So remember this: every kingdom built on the coin of kings will one day be weighed in the scales of the Lord, and the Avignon popes, though they ruled like princes, would one day be judged like men. My brothers and sisters, the darkness that had gathered over Avignon now bled into every corner of Christendom. The popes thrown a beacon of unity split like rotten wood, and from that wound came 2 voices, then 3, each claiming the mantle of Peter, each shouting that salvation could only be found in their hand. It began with Gregory XI, the last of the Avignon popes. In 1377, urged by the cries of reformers and the broken city of Rome, he fled the French court and crossed the Alps. The Eternal City greeted him not with cheers, but with suspicion. Rome had become a place of dust and knives, a city where rival nobles feasted on the bones of a dying empire. Yet Gregory endured. He died in 1378, leaving behind a fragile legacy, a papacy torn between 2 worlds. Ah, but power is a prize that tempts every heart. When the cardinals gathered in Rome to choose his successor, they were surrounded by Roman mobs screaming for an Italian pope. Under fear of violence, they elected Urban via man whose iron will and flaming tongue would set the world ablaze. Urban, unbending and unyielding, sought to purge the Curia of its luxuries, to drag the church from its French chains. But his harshness turned friend to foe. Many cardinals fled Rome, claiming Urban's election had been forced. In Avignon, they chose their own Pope Clement VII, and thus was born the great schism: two popes, two courts, two kingdoms of God at war. Ah, that my children, even sheep, will choose their shepherd. Kings and princes picked sides. France, Scotland, and Spain bent the knee to England, the Holy Roman Empire, and the North stayed loyal to Rome. And so the faithful were torn, their prayers caught between two thrones. Decades passed, popes died, new popes rose. Urban VI gave way to Boniface Ix, then Innocent VII, then Gregory XII, all in Rome. Avignon answered with Benedict XIII, a man as stubborn as the rock he claimed to sit upon. Each pope excommunicated the other, each declared the other a heretic, and the people, they wept for unity that never came. But even in the darkness, a light was kindled. In 1409, a council gathered at Pisa, council that dared to call itself higher than the Pope. They deposed both popes and elected a new one, Alexander V. Yet pride breeds pride, neither Rome nor Avignon. Now there were three popes, three voices crying in the wilderness, each claiming the keys of heaven. And so, my flock, the Church of Christ, became a house divided. Wars raged over crowns and creeds. And the people, they starved in the fields, while their shepherds. Yet even in this mire, men of faith rose. Reformers like John Wycliffe in England, Jan Hus in Bohemia. They saw the rot at the root and called for change. But the popes, fearful of their own crumbling thrones, condemned them as heretics. Hus burned at the stake, but his ashes carried a spark that would one day become a fire. At last, in 1414, the Council of Constance convened a gathering of bishops, emperors, and kings determined to heal the wound. They deposed the Pisan Pope, forced Benedict XIII into exile, and Gregory XII, weary and broken, resigned. And from the ashes rose Martin V, a Roman Pope, once more. The schism ended. But unity bought with gold is no unity at all. The scars of schism ran deep. The papacy had survived, but its throne was cracked. Its voice trembled. And though Martin V restored Rome's crown, he could not silence the questions. Could a single man truly speak for God? Could any throne built on blood and pride ever stand unshaken? So remember this, my children, even the mightiest fortress can crumble if its foundation is built on pride. And the papacy, once the shepherd's staff, now bore the stain of the sword. My brothers and sisters, the world had survived the schism, but the scars ran deep. The church, once the heart of unity, now found itself entangled in a new web, spun from gold, art, and ambition. The papacy, once humble, now shone with the brilliance of the Renaissance, but light that bright casts a long shadow. Rome reborn in marble and fresco drew the greatest artists to its bosom. Michelangelo's brush, Raphael's genius, the Sistine Chapel rose like a cathedral to human achievement. Yet beneath its beauty lurked a hunger for power that no paint could hide. The popes had become princes, and Peter's throne a court of kings. Pope Nicholas V laid the foundation of this empire of art, gathering scholars and builders to his side. His libraries overflowed with the wisdom of the ancient. Aristotle, Cicero pressed into service of the Holy See. His successor, Pius II, a man of letters, wrote histories and love poems, even as he brokered kingdoms and called for crusades that never came. But it was Sixtus IV who truly donned the purple of Caesar. He wove alliances with kings, sold offices for gold, and raised the Sistine Chapel, his name immortalized in every book. Yet he also unleashed the Inquisition against the faithful, and his nepotism made Rome's corridors run with intrigue. Nephews and cousins rose to power, the papacy a family affair, and then, by flock, came Alexander VI, the Borgia Pope. His very name, a brand of corruption. He fathered children, waged wars, and made Rome a nest of vipers. His son, Cesare Borgia, cut a crimson path through Italy, carving a kingdom with sword and poison. Even the faithful whispered that the Antichrist had claimed the chair of Peter. Ah, but power's crown is heavy, and even the Borgias could not hold it for long. After Alexander's death, Julius II rose, called the warrior pope. He donned armor, led armies, and dreamed of a new Roman Empire, ruled by the Pope's sword as well as his cross. He broke the power of the Borgia faction and drove the French from Italy. Yet even he found that kingdoms built on blood are kingdoms made of sand. But it was under Leo X, a Medici prince, that Rome's light burned brightest and its darkness grew deepest. Leo, lover of art and music, drained the church's coffers to build St. Peter's Basilica, a monument to his own glory. To pay for it, he unleashed indulgences, pardons, sold like wares in a marketplace. My children, salvation became a coin, and the poor were told to buy their way into heaven. It was in this age that a monk named Martin Luther rose in Germany, nailing his challenge to a church door. His words, like a spark in a dry field, ignited a fire that would consume Europe. The papacy, once the voice of Christ, now found itself the target of every king and every peasant who had tasted the bile of corruption. Rome had become a throne of kings, but the people had begun to ask, where is the shepherd? Where is the humility? So remember this, my children. Every empire that feeds on gold and pride will one day be devoured by the very fires it kindles. And the papacy, once the staff of Peter, had become a scepter that even kings feared to grasp.